The book I'm reading, The Heart Healers, by Dr. James Forrester. I'm currently in the chapter called What Man Meant for Evil. And I'm currently finishing it, so if you did see my previous video, I was talking about how there's this guy named Dr. Harkin, and this is during World War II, and he's just like fresh right out of the university, so he doesn't really have like any real experience, so to speak. And there's no professor near him to be behind him and say, let's proceed through this way or proceed through that way. It's kind of, he's all on his own. And right now, I did talk about how there was several soldiers who came in with stab wounds or wounds in the heart. And back then, during World War II, that's once that happens, it's like a no-no zone. This person's gonna die. Let them bleed, or let them go into a special room. Let them have their final moments alone or something. But what Harkin did basically was that he, inside the wounds, if the wounds were smaller than his fingers, which most of them were, he was able to, because the metal shards or any explosions that happened, any pieces of glass or metal that got into the men, if they penetrated the skin, maybe they might have penetrated the heart, right? So basically what he would do is he would put his finger on it and he would suture it while he would do sewing and suturing it while he would be opening, while he was putting his thumb on whatever cut. So right now, it's saying after World War II, just after they talked about Harkin, and actually this guy named Ryan, I should probably include this too. He did the same exact thing as Harkin, just maybe half a century before. But the reason why he didn't get any credit, as in Harkin did, is because the way life works is that they don't necessarily give credit to the first person who did a certain procedure, but they give it to the person who sort of proved it. Because if you think about it, Ryan only did one person and was only successful once, as Harkin had hundreds of soldiers go to him, and he was successful for most of them that he tried the procedure on. So he's really the one who proved it. That's why he got all the credit. Anyway, they're talking about after World War One, Harvard's pioneering surgeon Elliot Cutler was trying to attempt to treat a severe narrowing of the mitral valve. So let me get my heart model here. The mitral valve is the valve right here, right between the left atrium and the left ventricle. Right here. It's called mitral, it's called mitral right there. And it's actually a very important valve because, as you know, the left ventricle is the valve that is supposed to be containing most muscular out of them, because as you can see, the walls around it are quite thick compared to the right ventricle, because the right ventricle only needs to pump to the lungs, as in the left ventricle has to pump to the rest of the body, which is enormous work. So having a valve right before, that's a lot of blood that is not entering enough, which can be a very severe case. And so his idea was to make a tiny incision on the top of the valve, a narrowing valve. But sadly, he was only partly correct, because if you think about it, if you have something that's overclosing and doesn't open enough, if you were to cut it, of course, you significantly open it up more, so more blood would go back. But the problem is now that you've cut open it more, when the valve needs to close, for example, if it needs to close when they open the aortic valve, I'm not sure if I'm showing that right, but the aortic valve right here, if they're so basically how the heart pumps is that the pulmonary and aortic valves, they sort of close at the same time, around the same time, and they close while the opening of the mitral and tricuspid valves are opening. And this is because when these open, they allow blood to travel to the ventricles, and when the ventricles need to pump it to whatever destination, say lungs or the rest of the body, they need to close so then blood doesn't flow back. Now, the problem with it opening, with the valve opening too much, is that when it tries to close, it doesn't close all the way. If it doesn't close all the way, backflow will happen, so all that blood that was collected in the ventricle, not all of it will come out. Think of it like a water bottle, so to speak. Pretend the water bottle is like it's like one of the valves, and let's say you're trying to squeeze a water bottle. Obviously, when you squeeze it, the water will come out. But let's say this like extra hole in it. Let's say you cut a hole near the top of the, like right below where the opening is, but like somewhere inside the water bottle, just like where the air is when the water is, laid out flat. When you squeeze it, yes, you're right. Most of the water will come out of the top, but a tiny little bit will come out through the side. And all this extra blood can start adding up, and not as much blood is going to the rest of the body as needed. So again, this is kind of a problem. But Cutler did try to do this several times, and all but one of the several patients whom he did the procedure on have died. And so as he was discouraged, he kind of like abandoned this procedure. But one of the great things about, as it says here, great things about research is that we learn more about the failures than from successes. Kind of how, like, you learn from making a mistake because you expected something to happen, but instead something else did. And we learn about that. We don't learn much if someone said, okay, I think if I drop this ball farther enough, it will create like a hole in the ground or something like that. Or let's say I'm trying to have this heavy object, and if I let it go, it will break the wood floor. And, well, if it does, well, you don't really learn anything. You just know that you were right. But let's say it doesn't, then you kind of have to think about it. You kind of say, okay, maybe the floor is harder, or maybe it's like closer to the ground. Maybe it's made of cement. Maybe the object's not hard enough. See, you start learning these several things, and that's what the book is trying to sort of explain. And what was one of the most unexpected things was that Elliot Cutler would be Dr. Harkin's mentor. So Harkin did study all the details of Cutler's failure, and he would use these, like he would take the broken dream, so to speak, of Cutler's dream to like fix this problem in the heart, and he would make it a small stepping stone to success. So in the London battlefield, Harkin had like a plan of action that he was trying to do. It was very simple enough, except this was he was thinking to himself, like while he was doing all the doing the procedure of holding his thumb over a cut and then trying to suture it slowly while he would do it. He would think to himself, what if the cut is bigger than my thumb or my fingers? If it's so, and let's say the cut was, let's say it's like that big, I couldn't put my finger over it, but if I tried, my finger would probably slip in, and when I'm trying to get it out, would probably make the cut even bigger. And if I were to do nothing about this, every beat of the heart would slowly like rip the cut in the heart even more and more, which then more blood would be lost, thus would have the patient slowly bleeding to death, but in a more exponential, slowly getting faster. And so he would think about this. If he did nothing, he would fail. If he tried putting his thumb over it, he would fail. There are so many ways to fail, but in only very few ways to succeed. And if he were to fail, they did say in the book that, well, he could be like laughed at about this one very clumsy doctor, and obviously you don't want that for yourself. It's kind of like thinking, because I'm a student in a high school, if you were like a high school student and teacher asks a question and you think you know it right away, but then turns out you like answer something completely wrong and incorrect, you fail in this case sort of, and you're kind of like a laughing stock in front of everyone for maybe that few moments. But like, imagine the next time teacher asks a question on the board and you feel like you know the answer, you kind of have this grief because you're remembering that past thing, or everyone else would be kind of doubting you before you even try to raise your hand, right? So he was kind of stressed about this. Do I attempt my procedure because he had this sort of idea in his head, or do I not, because then I might be just killing the person if I'm wrong? And so eventually he gets confronted by medicine's most hollow 3 words: primum non nocere, which is first, do no harm. It's a principle that is in the it's as synchronic as a Hippocratic oath. So basically in medicine, apparently he did do this like court thing before, after he's done all these procedures, if he should get punished for doing them, or should he continue in this case. Well, he did say that because these young men were probably going to die if he followed the rules back then, which is like, don't touch the heart, he would probably like get in trouble if and the guy would die easily. He'd also probably get some blame because he wasn't doing anything about it too. So it's kind of like a kind of confusion. He kind of doesn't have a choice. But then again, if he was to attempt this and the person would die anyway, then he would actually lose his license, and then he would actually really be in trouble. But eventually he did state that, the person was going to die, and eventually got overruled by one of the the British Royal College of Surgeons. The president of the British Royal College of Surgeons did agree to his proposal only because it was logical, and he thought that his idea would work. And there was also no certainty to saying that there's no way his thing could work, or this thing has a partly chance of not working because it's never been tried. So eventually, days and weeks leading up to what was about to happen, a soldier comes in and he has this gaping chest wound in his chest, gaping chest wound, and basically there's this gigantic shard, rammed right into the right atrium, right ventricle. Yeah, right ventricle, which is right here. So this is the right side, because if I had this onto myself, this would be my right hand. To you, it's your left, but we're looking at it in the patient's perspective. So in the right atrium, there was a cut, which this can be bad because you're losing blood before it even gets oxygenated through the lungs. So right then and then, he knew he was trying to get ready for every single move. And so what he did is that around where the cut was, he would put sutures around, because there was still a piece of metal or something stuck inside where there was a cut. He would put sutures around as close as he could to the actual piece. And then once he got to the piece, he got his clamps and he clamped onto it. And as the author tries to convey how scary this might be, because you're clamping onto someone and you have no clue what's going to happen. If you yank it, what's going to happen? Is the sutures going to hold and just going to tighten, or is blood going to come out, or is the heart going to explode? He has no clue. So he did write to his wife what was going to happen next, and in his own words he said, "For a moment I stood with the clamp on the fragment that was inside his heart, and the heart was not bleeding. But obviously, when he had the thing, he did his only reaction. He yanked. So when he yanked on the fragment, he said, suddenly with a pop, as if a champagne cork had been drawn, the fragment jumped out of the ventricle, forced by the pressure within the chamber. Blood poured out in a torrent. So obviously blood was coming out, and in this awful leak, he asked his like assistants to like help him suture the heart. And eventually, through all of this stress, he eventually did. He did get the leak out, and he did put his fingers on and did like sort of the thing when he was running out of room, just to like save the guy. And eventually, the guy lived, which was good. And he did this to like 13 other people, with none of them dead, which was a good thing. But and over this years, what was really funny about this is like this was during World War II, and this was actually near D-Day. And if you don't know about your history, D-Day is the turning point of World War II. This is when I think the Allies capture a certain place where they thought it was impossible. Of course, many people died on D-Day, but this is when Germany sort of started running out of resources, and then eventually Germany gave up on World War II. But the funny thing is, it was the same day as cardiac surgery would have taken place. So you can kind of say like the turning point of World War II and cardiac surgery have the same birthday. They're kind of like twins. Then we go back to Harkin, and he was saying, what are ways that he can improve this? So first, like, because like for every heartbeat, the sutures that he would put, they would slowly stretch and stretch and stretch, and as they were stretching, they would then create the hole again, and then blood would still come through, and so he had to find a way so then the heart wouldn't start opening again with every beat. First, he used something called swedges, which he took like tiny rolled clots, and he kind of put them in between the sutures, so then like once it would open, it wouldn't open to like, it wouldn't be open so then blood can come out. These like silk like swedges would like block it, so then the blood wouldn't actually come out yet. But then, but second, he had a better idea. He decided to deliberately tie the sutures, kind of like the same way Dr. Wren did. During the split second when the heart was like expanded and like lax, and when it reached its full volume. So then like when it would beat, it would only beat to when the sutures were. So when it contracted, the sutures would kind of contract. Kind of like thinking about like when the heart beats, it opens. Like I said, it's going to open the sutures. So when it beats to its like, what in that half second when it beats to its full volume, he would suture it, and then it would close. But then the sutures would like hold it in place. So when the beat happens, the sutures kind of still like hold it in place, if that kind of makes sense. So kind of like how if the heart is beating and like the cut is kind of like coming out, like that's not really a good representation, but like if the heart is like beating out like this, for every beat the hole can get bigger, or like the sutures would outstretch. So what he would do is that when it would beat to its biggest, he would like do a suture here, so then when it would contract, then the heart would go small again, and then when it would beat again, it wouldn't stretch out the sutures because they were already to its like length, if that kind of makes sense. And eventually, like I said, not a single soldier died through like through all the people that he did the same procedure on. But they did say on like around July-ish of during World War II, they did say that the do not touch the heart kind of thing from medicine vanished, because now cardiac surgery was like a thing, and now they were actually like touching the heart, and they were actually trying to put sutures, kind of like how if you have a stab wound, you have to like sew it back up. Eventually Harkin would be greatly known for this, but then he would turn his, but then later in the book, they sort of talk about how before World War II, Harkin was trying to develop this thing. He was trying to remove bacterial infections from the surface of heart valves. So, like, it's they would eventually call this thing vegetations, if that makes more sense. And so basically there was these, like, infectious bacteria that would be inside the circulation of blood. And when it would get to the heart, it would just clamp itself to the valves. And this wasn't necessarily good. It would kind of clamp itself to the valves. And this wasn't good because this would kind of close up the valves more than it should be. And obviously blood won't flow, which is not a good thing. Okay, it's kind of seen here. So, yeah. And basically what he would try to do, he would be in the animal laboratory, and back then, just like, you won't test it on a human right away because it's not wartime yet. He would try it on dogs, and he would try to find something, and after many failures, like I said before, you learn more from failures than successes, he had an answer. So after taking the dog's mitral valve, he kind of speared a dog's mitral valve with a dirty safety pin. Because since it was dirty, a clot from the infection would quickly form on the pin, which then, like, the bacteria will kind of go on, if that kind of makes sense. And then the next question was, how can you get the pin out from the valve without killing the dog in the process? Which we're not quite sure if he was successful on that yet, but then it was kind of weird how he was going from trying to do a leap from doing a safety pin to the valve to a silver, like a big gigantic metal cut in the heart. But yeah, that's basically how the book kind of wraps things up. The thing I kind of enjoyed most about this was that thing I enjoyed most was kind of how doctors try to argue about their points, and mostly how failures are not, you learn more from failures than from success. So yeah.
Okay, so what did you learn on the heart disease, or on the issues specific?
Well, this one's specific. It's not really an issue. It's more of, like, not everyone will get stabbed, or not everyone will have, like, a silver, piece of metal chunked into your heart. But, like, in the case that happens, let's say the cut is too big, I did learn that he would have to, instead of, like, immediately trying to yank out the silver part and then suturing it up, because you can't cover it anymore. Blood is just going to be gushing out. Kind of how if you think of, like, you have a water balloon. Actually, no, that's a bad example. But, like, you kind of get it. If you, like, if you have, like, this packet of blood and there's something jabbed into it, and it's keeping the blood from, like, coming out in generous amounts.
Like a tire on your bicycle?
Yeah, think of it like a tire in a bicycle.
Like a nail in a tire.
Yeah, so nail in a tire. Obviously, air is slowly coming out, but then if you just take out the nail, you're not doing anything. But then it's too big for, like, you to cover it up with your finger.
Yeah, so the hair keep going out.
Yeah.
So, like, the blood keep going out.
Right.
Okay, so you learned that.
Right, so basically what he did, like I said, he did suture around the area.
First.
Slowly, yeah. And then he would take it out, and then, like, there'd still be a small hole, and then he would do the thumb thing and suture it up.
So that's what you learned. Did you learn anything else on the anatomical part?
An anatomical part.
From inside, what you explained with the vegetation, you say.
Yes, the vegetation. I'm not 100% sure. I don't actually, like, I've been trying to read it before I presented about it, but it's kind of hard to understand. Like, he took a dirty safety pin and he tried to put it into the valve. That was, like...
You can explain next time. You should.
Right, yeah. But yeah, that was probably the one thing I was trying to...
Okay, that's... So there is these two things only, or there's more stuff?
Mostly these two things.
Okay. Thank you then.